Live. We're live. Hey, this is Warren Redlick. I'm here with Brian Norton. Brian Norton is running for the Florida State Senate here in Boca Raton and other areas near Boca Raton. We're going to talk about a bunch of things, but we're going to start by talking about self-driving cars. So, Brian, first of all, I tipped you off. I was going to ask you about self-driving cars.
Yeah.
What do you know about self-driving cars? What do you think about self-driving cars?
I guess my knowledge of self-driving cars is a bit limited. I know that they've been testing in California, I believe. Google has one. I thought I saw Uber had one. I know Tesla, they have a version of self-drive. There's been a lot of talk about, automation and other self-driving. I know DoD used to do a lot of funding for self-driving. They had it wasn't like it was like an X Prize type thing where, you came every year, you had to meet a certain obstacle course, and they were pushing forward on self-driving cars. So to me, it's exciting. I like, you used to see it in the movies, and to be able to witness something like that start to come to reality is exciting. It's also a little bit scary, I'll say. Simply because I enjoy driving. So like the idea of not being in control, like when you're in the front, it seems a little odd to me, but I'm sure it's like anything else, something you get used to. But like I said, overall, it's exciting. It's interesting. I'd love to see where they go with it, and to see, more so than the passenger side of things, where else could that be used?
Okay, so I brought it up because you're running for state senate.
Mm-hmm.
And Florida state law is involved in regulating what's allowed and what's not allowed with self-driving cars. Currently, Florida statutes are favorable to self-driving cars.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm asking you about this because you're seeking office in a position that would have influence over self-driving cars.
Yeah.
And by the way, I've had this conversation with many candidates, several candidates already, some elected officials, some people who are running for office, or people who have been elected. Held other offices. And
Mm-hmm.
it's my feeling, and the purpose of this communication is as much about educating candidates and politicians as it is about getting answers, because so far, and no offense including you, so far most politicians don't know that much about the state of self-driving cars. So just for an example, what you just mentioned, Teslas are already to some extent self-driving.
Yeah, I know they had a feature. I guess it's how you define self-driving. For me, like they have that auto cruise feature. Yeah. Like I know people that have Teslas and they tell me about it. I guess I'm thinking of self-driving in like the way like Minority Report style self-driving.
Well, that's coming. But right now,
exactly.
Many Teslas have smart summon, where they walk out of a restaurant and they press a button on their phone and they watch, and their car backs out of a parking spot and drives up and picks them up. Or walk out of a store, whatever it is. And I believe different people have different opinions, even within the Tesla fanboy community that I'm involved with. I think that self-driving cars are coming very quickly. And that if you are elected to the state senate this fall, is it 2-year or 4-year term?
It's a 4-year term.
So by the end of your 4-year term, and I think early in your 4-year term, you're going to see self-driving cars on the roads here in Florida.
Yeah. I have no problem with it. And like you said, it's something that's not high on the radar when it comes to, what most people are talking about. But I'm definitely interested in it and excited about it. But I do, like what you're offering today, I do want to learn more. I don't, because I don't know that much, because I don't own a self-driving car.
So an example of something that I've talked with, there was a candidate who was running for sheriff, and I was talking with him about this. And here's a situation that the Florida state legislature may very well have to deal with. There's a self-driving car. It's empty. There's no one in it.
Okay.
A police officer sees it and thinks it's doing something wrong, and he wants to write a ticket.
Mm-hmm.
He puts his lights on. The car pulls over. He walks up. There's no one in it. Who's he supposed to give the ticket to?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question.
But it's a question you might have to answer.
Yes. No, it is. And I want to give you an answer right now, because it's something that you want to give very serious thought to, because it's not just, this or that, right? It may be based upon who sent the car out. What's the purpose of the officer pulling it over, right? Is it something where it's a legitimate glitch in the system, right? Is it something that, the officer didn't see something and he was pulling it over for a different reason? So the many different circumstances that maybe come up, whether it's getting pulled over, even in an accident. Like I know there was an accident with Tesla a year or two ago where they were trying to determine if it was the auto feature that was messed up, right? Who's liable for that, right? All those are very good questions, and I think you have to spend the time and think through those lines of thinking, because there could be many different answers, and one size fits all approach may not be right. Because, so for example, imagine it's a semi versus a passenger car, right? And is it the person that programmed the route? Is it the coding? Is it the people that are whose goods are being transported? Who owns the liability? And then how do you even insure against that? Like, how do you develop the actuarial tables for that?
Well, let's take it further.
All those are perfect.
Let's take it further. So right now, the DMV issues driver's licenses, and it is my prediction, and I'm extreme in this, but it's my prediction that we are going to see fewer people getting driver's licenses. That if you have a world of self-driving cars, and the scenario that I predict will happen is a self-driving car eventually, and not very far down the road, will cost less per mile than owning your own car.
Definitely.
And a lot of people will choose to ride in robo-taxis, self-driving robo-taxis, rather than paying to own their own car. And as that shift occurs, there's going to be less people going to DMV. If the cars drive as safe as believers, people like me think, there's going to be fewer accidents. There's not really going to be a reason to stop a self-driving car because it's inherently safe or much safer, and it's not really clear what a police officer do. Sorry, I'm reading a comment. As important as properly defining... I don't know what ad coelum property rights are, Thaddeus. Somebody's asking a question about property rights and how they impact that, so I'm not going to address that, Thaddeus, because I think that's off.
Yeah.
I don't know where you're going with that. So I think there are particular issues like, will we still need a DMV? Will we still need as many police officers? And here's what I found with most politicians, and you may or may not fit in this category, and maybe you should fit in this category if you want to be a successful politician, but if we don't need police to pull over cars, and roughly half of the crimes in Palm Beach County, Florida, are vehicular related. They're either driving while suspended or driving without a license or drunk driving. Roughly half the crimes are driving related, or they pulled somebody over and they found drugs in the car.
Yep.
That would basically eliminate half the crime. So maybe we would need half the police officers. So the question is, are you willing to let some police officer jobs go? Are you willing to say, we don't need so many people working in the DMV, we can shrink the DMV? Are those decisions you're willing to make, or are you committed to jobs?
Well, no, I'm willing to make those decisions, because like one of the philosophies that I live personally, professionally, and I put out to other people is, what was good enough for yesterday may not be good enough for today, and what's good enough for today may not be good enough for tomorrow. And that all that says is really things change over time, and you have to adapt to it. Right? So you may not need the DMV the way that we see it today. You may need a different type of DMV, right? Instead of it being filled with people that are processing paperwork and doing driving tests, there are people that are reviewing code and saying, hey, we're issuing a driver's license to this version of the software, right? On this vehicle. Say, yes, this vehicle has passed its driver's test, essentially. Just because, and this is like one of the other concerns of self-driving cars, because as you said, law enforcement pulls over a lot of people. They find drugs, people without a license, things like that. If the cars are safer, it's not that some of those crimes are going down. Like you don't have to worry about driving without a license, but they could still be transporting drugs.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't want to say that the instance of certain crimes are going down just because they're not being pulled over. What to me that says is we need to transition resources, right? So if we have, think of highway patrol, you may need less highway patrol or a different type of highway patrol, what they look at differently. Same thing with, regular law enforcement, where not necessarily you have to cut those jobs, you just reallocate them, right? You say, well, we're going to move the people that were doing normal, traffic citations to doing other things because, again, statistically speaking, it's not necessary, right? We have a lot less drivers. Not to say that you're going to have zero, because I know there's always going to be people that want to drive their, 1960, Mustang or anything, something like that. And, you'll still need some form of traffic control for that. But I'm perfectly willing.
Hold on 1 second.
To look
Matt, you say there's an echo. Are you hearing the echo on both people or one of us? And if so, which one of us? Go ahead.
So to answer your question, long story short, definitely open to listening to, and if something's not right, don't keep it open, right? If you don't need as many traffic cops, okay, maybe we need more cops in a different perspective, right? Same thing with the DMV. You have to adapt to the environment that you're in order to best suit that environment.
Okay. So I want to go to this question we've got. Brian is like, I asked you before, Brian, about headset. Do you think you can put a headset on?
Yeah, give me 1 second.
And when you put the headset on, mute while not speaking. It sounds pretty good, though. Okay. This may or may not help, but I just want to give it a shot.
Just close this. Where's my headset?
So, while everybody's watching, Thaddeus, you asked an interesting question about the Boring Company. I'm going to ask Brian about it in a minute. Would we be able to homestead in a third dimension if we allowed it? Just putting up liability insurance. And I'm sorry, folks. I don't know what's happened with Brian's camera, but it keeps changing dimensions on me, and I don't know if it's my software or his. So don't worry about it, Brian. I'm just telling you. Every once in a while, I have to fix the screen. No, Matt, that's fine.
I can't.
Matt, I appreciate you telling us. That'll help me later because I'm going to edit this and repost it. Oh, I need the headset, Thaddeus. All right. Well, hang on 1 second.
Let me see.
All right, so Thaddeus thinks I need the headset, so we'll try it with my headset. So, Thaddeus had a question. I'm going to ask you about a different question. We're going to come back to self-driving cars. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah.
And guys, tell me if that's better. So, Thaddeus, my question for you, this is something that Thaddeus asked about. I think this is a really interesting question as well. It's loosely related. Tesla is owned by Elon Musk. And Elon has a company called the Boring Company. And the Boring Company has this idea about building tunnels under the ground, like say from LA to San Francisco. They're currently building tunnels in Las Vegas. Are you hearing me okay? Are you hearing me okay, Brian?
Yes.
Okay. So.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, they're saying the sound is better. So I think the sound is better without you wearing the headset, so don't worry about it.
All right, that's fine.
So, and they'll tell me if I'm wrong. So, the Boring Company is this company that Elon Musk has that's building tunnels. They just finished 2 tunnels in Las Vegas for a convention center. They're planning on extending the tunnels to the casinos and the airport to enable a new form of transit.
The Hyperloop.
Hyperloop is different. Hyperloop is higher speed.
Okay.
They call them loops, but Hyperloop is hundreds of miles an hour. This might be 100 miles an hour. But it enables you to avoid traffic. You can do multiple levels, so it's easy to do lanes. It costs less to build a mile of tunnel than it costs to build a mile of roadway. But Thaddeus raised this issue about property rights, whether the property owner owns the ground, the earth underneath his property, and whether that creates a problem for a company that wants to build tunnels to provide this kind of transit. What do you think about that? If somebody wants to do tunnels that are going to create transit, does a homeowner have to be compensated for the land being used 50 feet below his house that he never knew was there and never did anything with?
That's a very interesting question. I'm sure that I'm not a lawyer, but I think I remember reading a briefing from the Supreme Court once where they talked about that, more particularly with oil rights and right of ways and things like that, eminent domain. But I think it's an interesting question because if I want to dig for oil on your land, I pay you, right? I lease your land from you, but that's because you're coming from the surface. When you go below it, I don't know how much of that land you own below you. You know, just like you don't own the sky above you, right? You don't have the Delta Airlines doesn't have to pay you to fly over your house, right? You know, and I would suspect it would be treated much in the same way as the airways would be. You know, you know, you would maybe own to a certain depth, and then below that is would be treated a similar way as the airlines. And again, I'm just thinking out loud here. It's something that you'd have to take a look at. But just like, you know, unless you're digging for a resource that can only be accessed from your property, right? Like you're mining for something, you know, and those are even special use permits for that. I don't think a general homestead would have the right to, let's say, 200 feet below exclusively, unless it was, you know, access to a natural resource. But from a, you know, right of way, easement, you know, utility access type of perspective, I think it would be treated much like the Skyways would be.
Okay, so let's go back to self-driving cars, because that's the topic that I think captivates a lot of people. I see us heading to a world where, you know, we have self-driving cars everywhere. It could have a huge impact on state revenue, because like my picture is Tesla produces the self-driving cars and doesn't sell them. Tesla just runs them as robo-taxis, and now we don't get sales tax, because and that's a huge chunk of sales tax revenue. So there's a lot of potential issues, and I'm just sort of curious, you know, I'll just tell you, my perspective is self-driving cars are going to make the world better for a lot of people. And let me take a step back. We already had a pretty radical change with the advent of Uber and Lyft. Have you taken an Uber or Lyft in your life?
I've taken an Uber a couple of times, yes.
Okay, so it's been a pretty radical change for some people. It's radical for the taxi companies that are losing business. It's radical for rental car companies that are losing business. It is more convenient in general than rental cars or taxis. It tends to be less expensive than rental cars and taxis. And we are heading to a world with robo-taxis where it will become much less expensive, half or less the cost of Uber and Lyft. Yeah. And that makes life better for a lot of people. But what we see from a lot of governments is resistance to business models that make people's lives better. And Uber and Lyft are a great example of this. Airbnb is a great example of this. In California, they're basically killing Uber and Lyft right now with their employment regulations. I believe that Uber and Lyft are still illegal in the Keys, in the Florida Keys. I'm not sure about that. Broward County used to resist Uber and Lyft. It's happened in other places. Yep. What are your thoughts about changing technology and the impact on vested interests who like giving candidate elected officials money?
Yeah. I know a little bit what you're talking about, because I've talked to several hotel owners who had that concern about the Airbnb. How do you regulate it? Hey, I have to pay, you know, every time somebody stays here, I have to charge all this. I got to make sure that this is done from a health perspective, right? And it's definitely an open question. So from my perspective, you know, sudden changes are always going to be met with resistance, right? So if I came to you and said, hey, we want to change the way we live, you know, this, and that, even if it's making your life better, majority of people are going to resist that simply because it's too quick of a change, right? So in order for change to be effective, you know, in most things, you either need, you know, something, a catalyst that's very strong, like what we just had with the coronavirus, right? Something that forces you to do it, or you do something over time, right? You make, you know, a progression towards it, you know, that allows people to adapt to it. Just like, you know, we're talking about with Tesla, you know, you have early adopters, and then you have the people that after they see the people that always get the newest thing, they start to use it, and slowly you get across the community. Like, you wouldn't change self-driving, you know, overnight. But because you have people that you know, that are very, we'll say, risk avoidance, and say, well, I don't want to try that. I'm used to this. It's just worked for me in the past. I don't want to make the change. But you have to, I don't want to say just support. You have to be mindful of what's the business doing, right? So the state has to constantly look at, you know, how am I getting my revenues, right? How is the industry changing? And how do I need to adapt to it? Because the state needs its revenues to do what it has to do. The question becomes, well, how do we better, define those revenues? With technology, you start running into a lot of interstate commerce clauses, you know, and I think, at some point, I would hope the federal government would say, hey, on certain things, the state can regulate once it's inside their state. Just like, with ride shares, charging taxes and things like that, it's perfectly reasonable. With Airbnbs, being able to start charging a tax, right? Especially if it's used, in a commercial sense, and that has to be defined. You need to, I guess I should say, the goal for me, the goal of the government is to be more of that umpire, referee. I'll use a sports analogy. They're setting up the framework like the NFL would. Like, these are the rules. This is what we're going to play by. This is what counts as a point. This is what counts as a foul. And they're calling the fouls. They're calling the penalties. Not necessarily who's going to win. That shouldn't be their goal. And you want to allow the commerce to work itself out, and it needs to. We may find that people like the self-driving cars in the cities, but it may not be economical if you live in more rural areas, right, where you have to drive 20 miles to go somewhere, here and there. Like, even where I live in West Boca, just to go, certain places, unless I'm going to the Publix down the street, I'm driving at least 15, 20 minutes at a time, right? And that may end up adding up. And if you want to make a long distance trip, that business model of, you're charging per mile or per trip may not make economic sense. And that's where people have to weigh those costs. And it also allows for another alternative, right? So instead of just doing like the Uber model, or we'll say the Ford model, buying a vehicle, or the current Tesla model, there may be a way in between there, right? So what I mean by that is, you may have more of a long-term rental, that's much more economical. I know one of the things I was always disappointed at, in cars is, they come with new stuff all the time. But if you build them to last a long time, I think they have much more value to the individual, and if they can be upgraded, instead of how you have to replace your phone every single year, if you could upgrade a single part in it and make it better, I'm disappointed when, like, in the iPhone, I can't replace the battery very easily, like we could in the old Nokia phones. If, hey, the battery went bad, let me just get a new battery. Oh, I need to change the screen. Oh, I want to put this cover on it. I want to upgrade this microchip in it. The all or nothing model, maybe there'll be a competitor to that says, hey, we're going to take the cars, we're going to retrofit them, and then every couple years we'll give you a new model, and it's much less expensive than doing the Uber thing or buying your own, because you're engaging in like a long-term lease. And it can be used as a ride share. It can be used in other ways as well. So I definitely think there's a lot of different issues that we have to think through. But at the end of the day, the government has to adapt. So if fuel, revenue from gasoline purchases go down because everybody goes electric, I would expect they're going to look at the electric company and say, well, maybe we need to raise the taxes on the electric to offset it, right? Maybe we need to find other ways to bring in revenue that are being elevated, right? I don't want to say, I don't think it's right where you harm one business because of the government weight on it from taxes and regulation, and allow another business to thrive because it's new and it doesn't have any. And that's where, government needs to be nimble, especially in this day and age when technology is constantly changing, new things are coming out, and you never know what's going to happen next. Nothing guarantees that Uber isn't going to have a problem and people move something else that's the latest and greatest.
So let's move on. For those of you who are watching, for the self-driving car section of the video, we're going to move on now and talk about stuff. The purpose of this video is, number one, because my audience is very interested in self-driving cars and new technology, but you're actually running for state senate covering West Boca Raton, Florida, and other areas, and I'm not sure how much of my local audience is as interested in self-driving cars. So we're going to talk for now about West Boca, about Florida, state issues, and I'm going to take that and edit that and put that up as a video on the West Boca News Facebook page after we're done. So let's go there. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
What's your background that makes you qualified for and interested in being a state senator?
That's a good question. So myself, I'm a small business owner. In South Florida, I had a landscape business for about 7 years. Didn't know anything about landscaping when I got in. I started it from the ground up, grew it to have over 30 employees before I got out. Right. So I did that because I've always wanted to say, hey, I own my own business. I'm sure you can appreciate this. It's a lot harder than you think. It teaches you a lot about perseverance. It teaches you a lot about patience, how to build bridges and get things done. Before that, I was in the IT industry up in Philadelphia, moved down when my wife finished her residency. And we started a family here. I have 3 young children, all elementary school aged. And that's very important to me. Right now I'm working with a company up in Jupiter that grows microalgae for the aquaculture industry and other industries, right? So they're a massively carbon negative company. They take CO2 to grow the algae. The algae is used for feed and also can be used for biofuels, biosolids, or anything else. Some people are using algae to make plastics and ink and other things. It's very exciting. So from an environmental perspective, it's interesting to see how we can use, some of the basic plant life on Earth and make some changes. But to answer the second part of your question, what makes me qualified is, in the beginning, it's simply that I care about our district, right? I think that our district deserves better than what it's been getting, right? I wasn't, a heavy follower of, the Florida legislature, for the first couple of years I was down here in South Florida. And what started making me take a look was going to the ballot box and not having an option, not having a vote, right? And I felt like, hey, that doesn't seem right.
Let me just explain that to the people who are not here, and this is true in a lot of places. A lot of America is gerrymandered, and we both live in an area that is gerrymandered Democrat. So if you're voting in Democratic primaries, sometimes you have an option. When you're voting in the general election, there may be no other choice than the Democratic candidate. Or if there is, it's a candidate that no one's heard of and doesn't have a meaningful chance of winning because so many people are going to pull the Democrat lever. And I believe what you're saying is you want to offer people an alternative other than the Democrat choice.
Yeah, for me, democracy is about choice, right? It's your ability to choose, right? In our democracy, in our republic, with our rights that we have, at the end of the day, it comes down to you can choose to do this, you can choose to do that. You don't have to do certain things. You don't even have to vote, right? It's a right, but you don't have to. Your choice. And I believe that the people of the district, number one, deserve a choice. Number two, they deserve somebody better that can actually get things done. When I started looking into the record of our current state senator and seeing, hey, what has he done for the district? He's been in there for 4 years. He was a state House representative before that.
Just so people know, you're referring to Kevin Rader, right? And Kevin Rader is now not running for the office, and we'll talk about this later. Yes. There's sort of I don't know if kerfuffle is the right word, but there's been some confusion thrown into the race. You were in before that happened. Yeah.
Okay. Correct. Yes. Yeah, I was in well before that happened. Came as a surprise to me, but it's welcome anyway. But at the end of the day, it's just looking at how effective are they? How effective can they be? And I use the comparison to our state House representative just a little bit east of us, which is in the state Senate district, Mike Caruso, first-time House representative. Right, he's been able to bring back $76 million to his district in appropriations. When I look at our district, how much has Rader brought in? I think it's less than 100,000. Right, and to me, it's like why?
Okay, so
let
me ask you about that.
What's going on?
I don't remember ever living in a place where a politician brought in appropriations to wherever I lived and I got any. So why does the average voter care about a politician bringing appropriations into the district?
Well, because if they're bringing appropriations in the district, it's for the causes that you care about, right? So number one, it's for economic stimulus and jobs, right? They're investing in your district. It may be making improvements to infrastructure, right? Fixing bridges and roads and utilities. It may be solving some problems that are in the community from other designs, putting stimulus in to grow certain areas. Again, at the end of the day, it's not going to go to you. It's not going to go to me. What it's there for is to stimulate the economy and other businesses that are needed that haven't been able to get done, whether it's from the county,
here's the thing.
City,
you
or anything
mentioned
else.
this Representative Caruso. Give me an example of something he brought in and why that mattered to the people where he lives.
I'm trying to think of one example. So I'll give you an example of what he brought in. It's a little bit different. It's what he saved the school district of Palm Beach County, right? So in 2019, do you remember the referendum in Palm Beach County where they did like the
penny tax?
They levied a tax for the schools for facilities, correct? And in that levy, it specifically said this is to go to non-chartered public schools. Okay. In the 2020 legislature, there was a bill up that basically said that any money raised through for levying must include both charter public schools and non-chartered public schools, and they were going to make it retroactive, right, to the previous fiscal year, right? And that would have included Palm Beach County, even though our language specifically said not only for non-chartered public schools. Miami-Dade had something similar, but theirs read slightly different, where it said just public schools, and the definition of public schools does include chartered and non-chartered. Okay, so what that would have cost the school district of Palm Beach County, the taxpayers, you and me, and the county in general, was $50 million worth of money. Okay, that bill came up, and you're not really thinking too much of it. The Democrats up in the House, put it out an amendment, right? And they started to argue for it. They're in the minority. Was anybody listening to them? Not really, but Caruso was, right? You have only a couple of minutes when they do things like that and hearing what they're trying to say. And, the representative from Wellington, Matt, I want to say it's Wiltmore. Apologize if I get his name wrong. He was, saying, no, we can't do this. This is going to hurt Palm Beach County. He was right to say that. Caruso said, you know what? I think he's right. This is going to cost us. We shouldn't have this. But, the floor wasn't really listening. So what did he do? Because he's a Republican, he was able to walk out of the chamber to where the Speaker of the House was, right? And said, hey, we have a problem here, and here's why. And this is what it's going to do to my district. This is what it's going to do to my county and my school and my people. And he was able to get the Speaker to come out, to pull the bill, to change it, and then they put it back in there in a different style so that it didn't hurt the county. So by having a Republican in that district, he was able to gain the ear of the Speaker, who has a lot of control, to prevent Palm Beach County, me and you, having to raise another $50 million because of something that the state legislature did. And to me, that's important. You need people like that have that ability. And unfortunately, many of the Democrats, or all of them, don't have that ability. They can't go to the Speaker and say, hey, I really need you to pull the bill, and this is why. We need to make some tweaks.
So part of your pitch is because the Florida House or the Florida Senate is run by Republicans, it's advantageous to have a Republican in office because the Republican is more likely to get things done with the Republican leadership.
That is definitely one of the parts of my campaign, is to say, look, I'm with you. I'm a moderate Republican. I'm a bridge builder. I'm even left on several social issues. And I think it would be to our advantage, to our community, to our district, if we had somebody that could go in there and talk to the Speaker or the President of the Senate, for which I'm working with, and say, hey, look, this is how this is going to affect my community. This is the problem we have with it. We need to make some changes. And at the end of the day, for me, again, going back to being a father, a small business owner, it's about getting things done, right? it's nice to have the great talk and to say what you're going to do and you're going to fight for the people, but you want results at the same time. You can say, I'm going to fight this, I'm going to fight this, but if you lose every single battle and you don't have a way to win the battle, I think, you're kidding yourself and you're misrepresenting what you're actually going to do, because at the end of the day, nothing's going to get better. From the legislation perspective, you need people in there that'll represent you that can actually get things done.
I want to be clear. I want to talk more about local stuff. Towards the end, I want to talk about COVID-19 and I want to talk about criminal justice, which are two very hot topics right now. But for now, I want to address, you said you live in West Boca. Which zip code do you live in?
33428.
I live in 33428 as well. So, and I live in Boca Falls. I'm not sure which neighborhood you live in. I believe the leading opponent on the Democrat side also lives in Boca Falls. I don't know which part.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't have any polling data to see if she's leading or if the other candidates lead. I have no idea. But
anyway, right. So, but the district is much bigger. How far north does the district? And we're at the southern end of the district, right?
No, well, it goes further south than us. So the district actually includes. So if you start from the north, well, we'll say northwest, you have Belglade, South Bay, out there. It includes all of Wellington. Comes down the western side of 441. Includes West Boca, East Boca, I get where Boca and Delray kind of meet, just south of Linton, and then stops at the county line for the most part. But it does come south into Broward County, which includes Coconut Creek, right? Down towards the turnpike. It includes all of Parkland and part of Coral Springs, the north end of Coral Springs. So, it's a very vast district.
So let's talk about some issues. I'm going to go specifically for West Boca now because most of the audience that's going to see this after I repost it is going to be West Boca. What in particular, specifically for West Boca, do you see yourself accomplishing in the state Senate? Is there something locally, some kind of local problem you think we could fix? I don't mean like the county school district problem. I mean, is there something local that you see that could be better and that the Senate could make a difference on?
Well, I think there's a couple things here. Do you remember back to Hurricane Irma? When and I don't know if right.
I'm suing my insurance company right now over Hurricane Irma, so sure, with a roof claim.
Okay.
So. Yeah,
that's always fun. I was still doing a lot of landscape work at the time, right? And right after that happened, I noticed, I don't know if you noticed, as you drove down, Palmetto Park, the drainage district started removing a whole bunch of trees.
In Boca, in the Boca del Mar area.
I asked them about that.
Okay.
Yeah, but it wasn't just that. They were removing vegetation all over their district. And when you asked them about it, it was because FEMA had said you're not maintaining your stuff. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing to prevent damage and loss. And to me, that was very important because, for the same reason, and again, it's not our district. Every time I open the Sun Sentinel or online and I say, hey, another sewage main has broken, right? It makes me ask the question, what aren't we doing today that's going to rear its ugly head in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, that now it's going to cost more money out of your pocket and my pocket, right? So for me, it's very important to look at these specialty districts. And it does incorporate more than just our zip code, but to take a look at them and say, hey, is the water management district, is the drainage districts, are the utility districts, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing to maintain their infrastructure? You and I have the luxury of, underground power lines. I love it, right? Irma came through. I stayed here. I sent my kids up to my mother's in Georgia. We didn't lose power once. I think I lost satellite for an hour or something during Irma, which was, great. Kudos to well-built construction and building codes. But I worry in the future, what kind of maintenance is required for that upkeep, so that we can maintain, that way of life. What kind of maintenance needs to be done that isn't getting done today because, we'll say district politicians, find it more advantageous to put money somewhere else rather than in maintenance. And personally, I relate, because I saw it all the time. I'll bring it back to landscaping, not as urgent, right? But even tree maintenance, right? We dealt with a lot of trees after Irma that just fell down. Why? Because they weren't being properly maintained, right? And it doesn't take a rocket scientist. I mean, we have arborists, but you could go out and, I mean, in your neighborhood, you had numerous trees fall down.
Yes, we did.
Right? Some of them were well maintained, some of them weren't, right? And it's not a sexy topic. Don't get me wrong, it's not a sexy topic, but if you realize how much money was spent just in the cleanup of lawn alone,
how does the state senate play a role in that?
Well, I think it plays a very important role in in the oversight process, right? So it's in looking at those districts, putting harsher accountability into legislation that requires the districts to spend a certain amount on maintenance, right? So if their project says, hey, this is going to be let's say a $300 million project, well, what's the budgeted maintenance on it? Well, it's got to be this. Okay, well, you're required to do that maintenance, right? You can't say, well, we're going to take 25% off of it and put it over here because this is a nicer project. No, you need to maintain the stuff that you do, because at the end of the day, we all end up paying more when they don't do that. Instead of just saying, I'm going to spend this $25 million on the maintenance, I'll spend 15. It's going to cost us an extra 20 to 30 to clean up the mess, when the mess happens. And that's I look at things much more long term. I don't look at it just today and tomorrow.
Let me ask you about my own little own little pocket issue. If you drive to the west end of Palmetto Park Road, there's a canal.
Yes.
If you jumped the canal, there's a big piece of land over there that used to be called the Parker Ranch. Same Parker as the Parker Playhouse. And it was taken by eminent domain about 20 years ago. The plan was to build a landfill. Local residents opposed the landfill, and ultimately the landfill didn't get built. It now has a sign up, and I moved here 8 or 9 years ago, and the sign was there then that said, "Future home of the Fran Rice Preserve." It's been the future home of the Fran Rice Preserve for probably at least 10 years. I'm wondering when it's going to become the present home of the Fran Rice Preserve and what that preserve will be like. I've been on the land. It's basically a big empty piece of land where not much is happening. I think there was some plan that it was going to be used for stormwater drainage, but it doesn't appear that any progress has been made in that. It looks to me like a place that would be great for walking trails or dirt biking trails. Personally, I would put a shooting range out at the west end. That probably wouldn't be popular with a lot of people. Might be popular with some, but not others. But what are you aware of this piece of land? And no candidate I have spoken with yet was even aware that it was there. But if you drive Loxahatchee Road to the end, it's on the right.
Yeah. Like I know the piece of land you're talking about because it's just to the east of the main preserve that's out there, the main
the Loxahatchee Wildlife Refuge,
right?
yes.
Yeah, it's just the east of that. And when I drop my kids off at Water's Edge,
it's right there.
Almost every single day. It's right there. I see it. And I always wondered why the road just doesn't turn. It looks like it wants to go straight but then stop. And I'm like, there's nothing out there. Like, to my knowledge, they have no plans to develop.
Just so you know, there's a history there. In addition to the landfill, Glades Road, which comes down and meets Palmetto there at Water's Edge Elementary, was supposed to continue south, and there was supposed to be a bridge to go over to University into Parkland and then Coral Springs.
Yep.
And that was the other thing people here in Boca Winds and Boca Falls didn't want built because we didn't want more traffic from those smelly people in Broward. We didn't want them coming up here. And it turns out people in Parkland don't want us coming down there either. I know, because I live in the neighborhood kind of diagonal from you in Boca Reserve, and our road was originally slated Riverside to connect to do the same thing. But then after our developer built it, we were able to get a lot of the land that the county technically owned, the easement, given back to us, right? They abandoned it, and we said, well, give it to us, and they did. So, I definitely feel you there. I like our section of the county. I like how peaceful and secluded it is. I do think that we do have certain, I'll say, traffic issues with the high school there. Clear,
and it's very easy to speed.
I want the bridge because my favorite Indian restaurant is down University. And it would make my drive to my favorite Indian restaurant much shorter. But most of my neighbors hate me for saying that. Yeah. Most of the people who live where we live do not want that to go through.
Yeah, I feel your pain because anytime I have to go to Coral Springs or down even the Sawgrass, it's at least a 15-20 minute drive because there's so many lights on 441. You know, I know this is more of a county issue, but like the timing of the lights are just terrible. I'm not saying that needs to be legislated at the state level,
Well, it isn't. It is
but
an
you know,
FDOT
it's
issue. I've spoken with with an FDOT engineer. FDOT
okay.
still wants to build that bridge specifically to relieve
Yeah.
traffic at the Hillsborough 441 intersection, which is the worst intersection there. That there's too much traffic there, and if
Hmm.
you built the bridge, then it would really alleviate traffic there. And even though it would only be a little bit of traffic, that would relieve a lot of problems on 441. So it is a state issue because FDOT wants to do it. But
Okay. I wasn't aware that FDOT
But
wanted to
I'm
do that.
guessing your
You
opinion
know,
is no, we shouldn't do that because I don't want all that traffic near my house.
well, it's more than it's not the traffic per se. It's that Palmetto Park and even part of Glades where it's at, because even if you go north on Glades, just past the high school, speeding is an issue, right? I don't know about you, but I think the posted sign is 35 or 40. You know, sometimes it goes up
I
to
think
45. But
Glades and
people
Palmetto Park
routinely,
Road are 40 or 45.
yeah, so people are doing 50, 60
Sorry about that.
plus,
I'll try to
you know,
slow down.
all the way down to the end. Yeah, I know. But you know what I'm saying? Like I think it's that long straightness without a lot of lights that enables you to accelerate and pick up a lot of speed, and more so than the traffic, because you know I don't know how much traffic is going to come this far west to go back east, um, but I do think it's that speed factor. It's a heavily residential neighborhood. A lot of kids. We have I think 4 elementary schools in our zip code, I believe. A lot of walkers. Like my kids aren't eligible for the bus. We live
Right.
way too
Same
close
here.
to all the schools. We wouldn't be eligible for any busing, right? So you have crossing these streets at high speeds with no stoplights, you know, minimal crossing guards, you know, and I think that's where the danger is posed, is to our kids. You know, I know it's inconvenient for us, you know, and unless, you know, maybe with the self-driving cars, you know, that's going to alleviate some of that speed issue. But you know, at this time, that's where I look at it as a father is, you know, I think you have to first solve the what the current traffic issue, which is the speeding, and then you can take a look at the you know having more traffic because I've never seen this, you know, west of 441 Palmetto Park or Glades Road backed up unless it was
Okay,
an auto
so
accident.
let's move on.
So
I want to ask you, let's start with COVID-19.
sure,
You and I probably both shop at the same Publix. You live closer to it than I do.
yep,
What your kids go to the same school? My kids are older, so they're not going to Water's Edge anymore. But your kids
yeah,
came home and weren't going to school, and they were taking classes at home or whatever, which is tougher for elementary school, I got to think. What's your take on what's happened with COVID-19 so far? What would you have done differently, and what do you think we need to do in the future?
well. No, the first thing, I don't want to play Monday morning quarterback, and that's just because I don't think it adds much value to the conversation, right? Trying to say, well, this should have been done different, this should have been done different, but I definitely think there's a lot to learn, right? Every opportunity isn't that happens is an opportunity to learn. Whether you did great or you did poorly, it's always an opportunity to learn and to take that and do better. So I can tell you a lot of my understanding of COVID and a lot of my knowledge about you know what it is and what goes on is from my wife. My wife is an ER physician, so we had to deal with this personally to figure out how are we going to handle this every
What
time.
hospitals does she work in?
Right now she's at Boca Regional, right in East Boca. So you know we had to you know we had to answer like some tough questions when she comes back. You know, does she sleep in a separate room? How are we going to handle interactions with the kids because she has that high risk of exposure just because of the nature of her job. You know, how does she change her routine? How do we change our routine? Because she's high risk, we have to change our routines as well, and that's to protect everybody. Back to what we did right, what we did wrong. I think that's the wrong way to look at it, and I say that because we can't change the past. We can ask, how can we do better next time? How can we be more effective? You know, this is the first time to my knowledge, that we've had a nationwide shutdown like this for a health emergency. The first time that, at least in my lifetime, that a pandemic was taken as seriously as this one was, with the self-isolation, self-quarantine, and all that. I do think that Florida was much more prepared than other states to handle the situation, because we have a lot of practice with it. The hurricanes, I know as much as we hate it, I definitely believed helped us in how we responded to the situation, because we had a lot of the infrastructure in place. It wasn't designed necessarily for healthcare, but that doesn't mean that infrastructure, couldn't have been used for the COVID crisis, right? You look at the emergency management response. You look at some of the things that the governor had done in allocating resources. All those things were possible because of what the state had set up in the past to respond to hurricanes, right? And I think we can take a look at, hey, what was successful, what wasn't successful. Many things are outside of our control, and I know that's hard to accept, right? We didn't have control over the testing. A lot of issues with getting testing out there. We didn't have a lot of access to the PPE and other things, because it was done at a national level. But the things that we could control, I think we did fairly well. Targeting more of the nursing homes, making sure that they were as secure as possible. Not perfectly, we can always do better. But you also had a wide range of facilities. You had facilities that were very well staffed, very well stocked, very well funded, and other places that were barely hanging on. And acknowledging that and saying, okay, so this is a once in 100 year. I'll use the Spanish flu to compare, a 100-year event. What could we do that's not an overreaction to be prepared?
Let me call you on that.
Sure.
You're running as a Republican. I'm actually a registered Democrat, but it seems like lately I sympathize more with Republicans. Don't you think we overreacted? A lot of Republicans think we overreacted, don't you?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think it's a, I don't want to say foolish, but it's of low value, at least to me personally, to play Monday morning quarterback and say we overreacted, we underreacted, we should have done this, we should have done that. Hold on. I say that simply because of the fact that in my own life experience, that doesn't make me any better, right? That doesn't make me better for the next time.
It does.
Right?
That's exactly the point. That's you said the Monday morning quarterback line before. It's like, well, if this comes up again, what you think of what we did this time matters for what we do next time. And I'll just, to be clear, and I'm not saying my wife agrees with me. I'm not saying my friends agree with me. I think we overreacted. I think we've destroyed our economy. We've destroyed tax revenue in the state of Florida, which is heavily tourist dependent. We destroyed your wife's hospital because, the number of patients coming in was dramatically cut. We destroyed West Boca Medical Center. There was a lot of bad things that happened from this reaction. And Florida overreacted less than some other places. So Florida did better in that sense. But just my opinion, schools never should have been closed. Children are not at risk. You're talking about your wife, and you're younger than I am. I don't think I'm at risk, significant risk from the virus. I suspect that you, even though your wife, I understand, is more exposed to it, I'm going to guess she's comparable in age to you. The impact on you. Now, you're probably letting your wife be the medical expert in the family, I would assume. But your wife is not. She might be at a higher risk of being exposed to the virus. Except, I don't even think there have been a lot of COVID cases in Boca Regional Hospital. Have there? You would know better than I would.
I don't know the exact number. I mean, I do know they have them. I do know, that they've had a fair number. But I don't know all the statistics because, frankly, I don't pry into that from her. But what I mean by, and I guess let me clarify. What I mean by Monday morning quarterbacking is going back and saying, oh, so-and-so should have done this. So-and-so should have done this at that time, right? Because you're using knowledge you had now. What I think needs to be done is what actual professionals do. Like, so I don't know if you saw the documentary about Michael Jordan, or you've seen documentaries about other athletes. What they do is they watch the game film and they say, let me see what I did wrong. Okay, let me see how I can do better next time, right? They're not listening to the fans and the people saying, oh, this guy was wide open. Oh, you should have made the shot from here. Couldn't you see this? Because that doesn't do any good. You have got to go back and I'm saying the governor needs to go back, the emergency department needs to go, emergency management, the legislature needs to go back and essentially watch the game film of what happened and say, hey, where could we have done better? Now, knowing everything we know now, right? I know from the medical community perspective, they weren't trusting the data that was coming in, right? Whether it was from, China and other places. So they had to treat it as an unknown, right? And they're, in order to do what they need to do, they're overly cautious on purpose because they don't know what's going on. They don't know, what works, what doesn't work. I know originally we thought, ventilators were massively important. I know they found out, if you put people on their stomach,
I'm going to disagree with you about the word cautious, because they may have been cautious about how the virus might affect society, but they were not cautious about how the shutdowns might affect society. They were not cautious about the mental health impact on children of not being in school. They were not cautious on the impact of children being home on the parents. They weren't cautious about the mental health impact of eliminating all these jobs. They weren't cautious about the fiscal impact of not having tax revenue, of increased spending. They were, to my mind, they were not cautious. They were aggressively careless with regard to everything but the virus.
Well, and I'm not going to 100% disagree with you on that. I do, one of my major disappointments with I guess the way this was handled, we'll call it a disappointment, was that we looked to people that were experts in a certain field to be experts in all fields, right? I think you want to ask the physicians in the medical community, what do we need to do about the virus? But you ask economics about, the economy. You ask psychologists about children. How's this going to affect children's mental health? You ask the appropriate people in the appropriate fields. And, in our system of government, it's the leadership that has to go to all those different places and ask those different questions. And they're the ones that make the decision because they have to find the balance between all things, right? The executive has to find that balance. I was proud of Palm Beach County for asking the governor to open up early, right? They said, hey, we can open up before Broward, don't lump us in with Broward and Dade, because we were. But I think, and this is where, like I said, from the social media and I'll call it mainstream, the regular media perspective, people were taking what the medical community is saying about the virus as law of the land for everything. When to me that's like you said, they are not experts in any of those fields. They don't study those fields. They don't deal with those fields. All they can talk about is what they know. And when we ask them to talk about things that they don't know, it does them a disservice. It does us a disservice because they're left to speculate. You can say, well, I think we should do this, but all those other areas that are just as important that need to be weighed in and balanced. And don't get me wrong, probably during the COVID crisis, the medical side has a larger part in that scale. But it's up to the politicians to ask the right questions and to find that balance on, hey, what's going to work with us? I do think that once the country went shut down, the governor had no choice but to follow suit, right? There wasn't, I think South Dakota kind of tried to hold its own there. But I think with the population of our size, there's certain risks. But I definitely think we probably could have reopened sooner, knowing what we know now. We could have reopened sooner. We probably could have left schools. I told my wife, this, not that long ago, or, I guess it was towards the end of March that, I was like, I wonder if I go ahead and let me get exposed on purpose. That way I can get past it, get through it. Because like you said, from what we knew at the time, people of my age and under 65 weren't as high a risk. There's still a risk. There's still risk of, you getting it and having other long-term issues, but it wasn't nearly as high as what we were seeing elsewhere. And it was similar to, the risk levels of other annual viruses. So, it was one of those things where it's like, should we be doing that? And I'm the type of person, I'm very Socratic in my thinking style, where I ask a lot of questions because I know that the answer is generally not a one size fits all. It's generally not just this. And, what was best for the city like New York may not be best for upstate New York or even Florida. What's best for Miami may not be, best for, Pahokee or Belglade. You can do things differently, but I do think what they did right, at least in Florida compared to some other states, is it was acted like it was much more of a request of the citizens to stay home, do your part, than it was a heavy-handed order.
Okay, so let me ask you about
another. And I did appreciate.
We're going to move on quickly. I want to go to criminal justice next.
Sure.
But you and I both shop at the same Publix. I decided maybe a week or two ago. I never bought into the mask thing. I understand why your wife would wear a mask in the hospital. When I visit my mother in the assisted living facility behind Packy's, I wear a mask. I don't visit my mother, I should say. When I go in to drop things off, I'm not allowed to see my mother, with rare exception. Yeah. But I wear a mask when I go into the assisted living facility because those people are genuinely at risk. The risk to people over the age of 65 is significant. Over the age of 75, and my mother's in her mid-80s, the risk is very, very high. Not just for my mother, but for all the residents. So I'm careful when I go in there. But I think otherwise, and I'm not just relying on myself, but WHO documents, an article in the New England Journal of Medicine by doctors from Harvard Medical School, outside of those settings, and I'm including your wife's hospital setting as a serious setting, masks are a joke. This is a fraud. It's not that they're no value at all. It's that their value is so trivial, and no one talks about the negative consequences of masks, that sometimes masks can increase risk of infection. So I'm going to guess you wear a mask when you go into Publix. But how do you feel about the rule that if I don't wear a mask when I'm in Publix, that the police can arrest me for it?
I don't like that.
This, by the way, is a good segue into criminal justice.
Yeah, I mean, I do disagree with my wife on something because, again, my perspective is a little bit different. Although I'm a Republican, she's a Democrat. We get along great. And it's taught me how to talk to Democrats, to be honest. But, she's looking at it from a medical perspective. I look at things a little more, I try to look at it a little more holistically, a little more from an economic and social perspective. And I ask a lot of questions, right? I wear, when I go out, when I do wear a mask, and I'm not saying I always do, because sometimes I honestly forget, like I'll walk out of the car kind of thinking about something else, and because it's not, a habit for me yet. But I do it more as a way of saying, hey, there's a lot that I don't know. I don't know about, how, if, contagious, and I also want to be supportive because I could be passing by people that are in that, age group, that 65 plus age group. And I want them to be comfortable as well. Right. So I'm trying to be responsible. I don't disagree with your statement about masks, right? I do think it's, I think there's a small level of benefit, but majority of the benefit that's gained is more perceptual than actual.
Well, that's what I mean by a fraud.
Right? Yeah.
That's what I mean. But not, the virus is real. I don't want anybody to think I don't think the virus is real. I've been reading data, like I just read an article about diabetes patients, and the risk to a diabetes patient who's 75 years or older is 15 times as high as the risk to somebody who's under 65. From 65 to 74, it's 3 times as high. 75 plus, it's 15. I'm sure when you get to 85 plus, it's like 50 times as high. So it is a serious risk in some circumstances. And my answer, which is, by the way, one of our commenters, Matt, said, we honestly should have just warned the old and sick to self-isolate instead of shutting down society. And that's my view, that we're actually not doing enough to protect the elderly because we're distracting ourselves with this other stuff. But I want to get, this is how we segue into criminal justice is, it's one thing to say, hey, I don't like, Warren, I don't like that you're not wearing a mask. I'm going to boycott your business if you don't wear a mask. I'm going to boycott your business if you don't make people wear masks. If that's people's opinions, and then the business owner says, you know what, I got to satisfy the people, everybody's got to wear a mask. I don't like it, but I'm okay with it. But we have seen incidents. There was one, and I saw in New York City, and I'm sorry, just for a little side note, I was at the Burger King on Federal Highway in East Boca, just north of Palmetto Park Road, and I put on, I have this mask that's, it's a joke mask, it's a bandana that's not really protective of anything, but you put it on, people are satisfied. This guy walks in, he takes his shirt, and he goes like this, right? The manager of the Burger King screams at him to get out. She's wearing a regular mask like this. not covering her nose. The worker standing next to her is wearing, the minimal medical mask, not the N95. Neither one of them is covering their nose. And they're telling this other guy, he's actually, his mask is a joke too, but at least he's covering his nose. She orders him out, he goes out mad. But that's a business. They're making a decision for their business. I thought it was stupid, but I still got my burger and ate my burger. But when you get to the point where you send men with guns to force people to wear a mask, you sometimes end up with situations like Eric Garner or George Floyd. And it's a balancing act because, look, I'm sorry, you're a Republican. This isn't just masks. Okay, this is how we segue into criminal justice. Yeah. If you want fewer George Floyds, if you want fewer Eric Garners, if you want fewer Philando Castiles, you need a world where there's fewer police encounters with civilians. And I don't like the word civilian, why? Because I think police are also civilians. But you need fewer encounters between police and other people. The more encounters, because look, I'll buy the argument that most cops are good cops. I actually think it's more of a department-based thing. I am now convinced that the Minneapolis Police Department is rotten to the core. But that doesn't mean that every Minneapolis police officer is bad. But I think a lot of cops in other departments where they are good get negative feedback from this because of something that happened in a bad department. But the way you solve that problem, all these people talking, I don't care whether you're Black Lives Matter or you're the right wing, nobody is offering a solution to this that would matter. Protesting, saying it's not right, that's not fixing it. Saying, those guys should go to jail, well, that's not going to stop the next guy. The thing that stops this, if it's what anybody actually wants, which I'm not sure, people don't just want it for the fun rather than for actually making change. End the war on drugs. Not a very Republican issue, frankly, not much of a Democrat issue either. End the war on drugs. End the traffic enforcement scam. Okay, where I'm a criminal defense lawyer who's made a lot of money in my life defending people accused of crimes, defending traffic tickets, particularly in New York, but here both. Defending drunk drivers. The system that we have where you send men with guns to pull over cars who are often, people don't believe this, often they're basically innocent people. You're creating potentially violent encounters. And you're sending people, sometimes you got a great department. You and I both know the Boca Police Department. They're probably good people. I haven't heard many bad things about the Boca Police Department. And I follow local crime stories. I write local crime stories. Mm-hmm. I have a very positive impression of the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office part that handles West Boca. I might have some beefs here or there, but by and large, I think the Palm Beach Sheriff. But I know the Homestead Police Department is rotten. I know the Riviera Beach Police Department is rotten. And without getting to specifics beyond that, there are a lot of police departments in this country that are rotten, and we're not going to fix them by making a big deal out of George Floyd, and we're not going to fix them by complaining about protests or having protests. The way we fix the problem is we say we need less policing. So what do you think about whether we can have actual solutions that will prevent the next or reduce the number of future George Floyds?
Yeah, there was
yes,
a lot
I did.
there.
I went too far. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I definitely agree with a lot of some of your premises. Personally, I have a much more libertarian kind of streak in me, right? I don't want the government. I don't think they have the right to tell me, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that, right? Their first job is to preserve and secure our rights, and secondarily is to provide services to the public, right? And the reason, how do I say this? One of the ideas that I've been discussing with a lot of people is I feel like all too often, this probably goes to what you're talking about, the government tends to put its finger on the scale, right? Oh, we need to correct the problem. I'm going to put my finger on the scale, right? But it all too often forgets to take its finger back off the scale when it needs to, right? Because balance and an imbalance is a natural occurrence of things, right? And when you leave it on too long, other things get built up around it. And if you try to take it off, well, that's going to cause this problem now. And like what you were talking about with over-policing, by overdoing, because you're trying to solve a problem and you're looking at it from I don't want to say an acute perspective, but from a short-term perspective, trying to, figure out, hey, what's the best way to control this? Like take an example for marijuana, right? Is it better to have it legal and well regulated, or illegal, right, and not regulated. I definitely think that's a conversation the legislature needs to have, right? What's the proper regulation on marijuana? Same thing on other narcotics. But in order to have more effective policing, like I think a lot of that starts, yes, there are issues with certain departments, but I think it also starts with education, right? And I'm going to put something out there that I don't hear anybody talking about, but I bring it up and people, tell me, well, it kind of makes sense. As a kid, right, I had no introduction to law enforcement except for what I saw on TV, right? I might have had a DARE officer come to the school once a year. That was my exposure. And I can imagine if I'm a young black man, my exposure is going to be way different, right? And I know we were talking about, perception versus reality in how well the masks work, but the same thing goes with law enforcement, right? Your perception oftentimes is your reality, whether it rightfully or wrongfully so, your perception is reality. And I think we can do a lot more to fix the law enforcement issue by exposing people to law enforcement at a young age and, over time, a little and often, right? No one ever, besides my parents, no one ever taught me to say, hey, what happens if you get pulled over? It probably would have been nice for an officer to come in and say, hey, we're gonna practice pulling you over. This is what you should do. This is what you shouldn't do. This is how, this is what we see. So don't do this, right? Those are all the things that will teach you, if you get pulled over, what you need to do to get out of it as quickly as possible. I remember the last time I got a speeding ticket, I was in and out in it was like a minute and a half, right? It wasn't a long stop. And that was, because I kind of knew how to go through the motions, right? And, keep the officer feeling comfortable and safe, me staying comfortable and safe, like you said. I think, a lot of people fail to realize that when you get pulled over, it's not the time to argue. That's not,
okay, but so it sounds like your answer to the problem is that people should behave better around police officers, and I don't think that's a solution to the problem.
No, what I think a solution, not the solution, right? Because it's going to be more than one thing. It's never just one thing. I think a solution that we can do, that we can control in the short term, is exposing our citizens, right, our children especially, through education of, hey, this is, more about law enforcement, who they are, what they do, what they're going to do in this situation, what they're going to do in that situation, right? Know your rights. Like, at the same time, you can have a lawyer at the same time and say, hey, this is what you should do from a legal perspective, right? And that goes to one of my platforms being about education, is bringing back, I know we talk a lot about, bringing back the more technical skills, but life skills, right? Preparing our kids for life. When
I don't think you've addressed my approach, which is we need fewer police encounters. I think what you're saying is, no, we're going to have the same number of police encounters. And I think that means we're going to have just as many George Floyds and Philando Castiles and whatever, the other, Rodney Kings, whatever. We're going to continue having those, saying we need to educate people more, saying we need to people have been saying we need to hold police accountable for years, and they just don't do it. The reason police aren't held accountable is because they have qualified immunity, because police departments protect them, because elected officials are afraid of police officers, because police officers and their families and friends vote more than regular people. They are a significant voting bloc. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that happens. And until we have politicians, and this is frankly, you say you're lean libertarian. I am libertarian. I mean, I'm a Democrat. I was elected as a Republican once before. I ran as a Republican before. I'm all over the map, but I'm a libertarian. And my answer is, look, we're not, I'm going to say this bluntly to you, we are not going to get the change that we need with Republicans and Democrats who refuse to take on special interests like police and prisons, and who refuse to say, you know what? Because I'm telling you, you know that I'm right. If we reduce the number of police encounters, we will have fewer George Floyds.
I definitely agree.
But you're not willing to reduce the number of police encounters.
Well, no, that's not true. What I'm saying, I'm talking, we're talking about two different solutions, right? Just reducing the number of police encounters isn't going to necessarily reduce, the negative outcomes that happen, right? And that's just me being, pragmatic, right? So just because we have less, is it going to help some? Sure, but the ones that they're going to have, right, might, be just as violent, right? So you have to, like any issue, criminal justice, police encounters, whatever it is, it's more than just a one perspective solution. You have to tackle it from many different angles at the same time, making incremental changes in order, because you also want it to be accepted, right? If you try to do too much too quickly, it gets a lot of rejection.
We have rejection right now. We've had decades of politicians talking about incremental changes, and they haven't changed anything. And we have riots in the streets. Now, we don't have riots in the streets of West Boca, right?
Yeah.
But
yes. We don't. No, we do not have them here.
I want you to know, I'm going to be just as hard on whoever else. I'm being hard on you, but it's not just you.
I mean, I don't feel it. I mean, this is fun. I like having these conversations because, like, I know you were talking about the police encounters, and yes, let's get rid of the things that don't make sense, right? The unnecessary police encounters. But at the same time, we have to make sure that the like you brought up the issue with making sure that the policies of the police department are consistent with what's going to give us the best results, right? You alluded, because I don't know. I mean, you alluded to like Homestead versus our, we'll say Boca Raton. I'm sure if we looked at their policies, they're vastly different, right? And part of me being, because that's how they might get different results. But part of the libertarian in me, says that the people of that area should have some say in what their police officers their conduct is, and that's through who they vote for, right? And if they vote for people that say, hey, we want to have a much more heavy-handed zero tolerance policy, which is not my perspective, versus another area that says, hey, we want to have a much more forgiving policy, right? That's up to the people of that district, right? And unfortunately, or fortunately, we live in a 50 state union where we have the ability to try things out, right? Because I don't think anybody knows the right solution, right? And if anybody that says, well, this is what we have to do, I'll tell you they're full of BS and they really don't know, right? Because it's more than just a singular problem. It's not as easy as a math equation, right? And you have these many districts, these many states, these many municipalities, and giving them that ability to try all things, it allows that bit of experimentation, a little bit of tweaking, and because we see it all the time. Well, this worked over here for them, and this worked over there for them. Maybe we can take some of that, and it'll help us out, right? And it's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but I think having that openness, again, that's the more libertarian part of me, and saying what's best for that community may not be best for this community. What's best for Miami and how they police, because of the people there, the citizens, and other things that are important to them, may be different than West Boca, right? We may say, what, we're not as interested in this one thing as you guys are, and they may not be as interested as we are. But I think there has to be a balance. You have to find that balance between the people that they're there to serve and them being able to do their job. The officers don't get to choose the laws, right? They didn't write the laws. They didn't write the rules, but they're required to enforce it.
They get to choose which ones they enforce.
They have some discretion over that. I get that. But there's also certain things that I'm sure if you would ask them, do you really want to be arresting this person for it? Well, no. But I'm told I have to because it's the law, and that's what my supervisor or the chief of police or the mayor wants me to do, right? And at the end of the day, they're accountable up the chain, and the top of the chain is accountable to us. And if we want change, we have got to get out there. We've got to vote. I know one of the big things in the Republican Party here is we want to be more present in more elections. That way we can give people the option. We can give them a choice and say we can have more of the same, or we can try something different, but at least you have that choice to make a change rather than being forced to stay the same way and relying upon someone who's in office, who's made a career out of it, and say, well, I want to stay in office, therefore I'm not really going to make too many waves, or, I'm not going to do something unless it's absolutely it has, my constituency support. They're not.
Let me just move on here.
For me being in here, I'm taking all of it.
Let me just move on here for a second. I want to ask you about the politics side of it, which is you're running for office. Running for office as a Republican in a Democrat-leaning district is challenging. The money is always an issue. What's your strategy rough. You're rough. I don't want the specific tactics of what you're going to do here or there. But what in general do you see in terms of how are you raising money? How are you going to get your message out? Some people are going to see you on West Boca News, but how are the people in Parkland going to see you? How are the people in Belgrade going to be aware of you? How do you get that message out in an age where a postcard costs 50 cents a pop, and it's very hard to get people's attention when we've got riots on TV and spaceships docking with the space station and crazy nuts like me excited about self-driving cars? How do you get the attention to get people to notice you?
Yeah. Well, back to self-driving cars real quick. I was real excited about the launch yesterday. So that was fun to see. But, my strategy is the same as I think what most people's would be. If I asked you tomorrow, hey, I want you to run for, to be elected by the people in your community, right? It's the same thing. It's being genuine, being yourself, getting out there and just talking to as many people as I can, right? I entered the race beginning of February. I was traveling a lot at the time, so it was.
Wait, let me pause you for a second. How many votes do you think there will be in the general election in your district? Will there be 50,000 votes, 10,000 votes, 100,000 votes?
I would say easily 200, 250,000.
It's a presidential election, so
yes,
it's going to be, and to some extent, it's going to be Trump's turnout versus Biden's turnout rather than your own influence. And you hope the Trump voters vote for you, and you hope you can sway some Biden voters, or they don't vote for the other side. But when you say talk to people, if there's 250,000 voters, if you talk to 100 people a day, which would be amazing, you're not going to talk to enough people. What else can you do?
Well, you're right. I can't physically talk to enough people, right? And the way that, but it's about how you engage. Like, so, if you and I are talking, at the end of the conversation, I'm always asking you, hey, do you mind telling your friends about me? Do you mind opening up your address book and letting me know, hey, which of the people that would be open and willing to talk to me? Do you mind going out there and hosting a party for me so I can meet some of your friends, right? So it's building upon the network. So the same idea between social networking and physical networking, it's the same thing. It's one person has access to multiple people. Those people have access to other multiple people. Right. So that's where the physical networking comes in place. The other thing I tell people is I don't care who you're voting for from the presidential side. Right. That's not important to me. That's not what I'm here for. Right. You can vote for Trump. You can vote for Biden. You can vote for the Green Party or anybody else. What I want to do is, number one, let you know who I am, make you comfortable with me so that no matter what party you're in, because we also have a very big NPA community. Right here, about 30% of the district is NPA.
Sure, that means no party affiliation for those who don't know that.
Correct. Yeah. And so I want to make sure that they feel, hey, it's okay. Yes, I'm going to vote. Let's say you're a Democrat and you're like, I'm going to vote straight. Normally I vote straight ticket, but because I've talked to Ryan, I know, I'm going to give him my vote. Yeah, he happens to be a Republican, but I like what he has to say. I like what he's trying to do for my community. And I think he might actually be able to be effective. And that's where that personal plea, right, that authenticity is most important, And I've seen that because I've talked to a lot of people, right, because I couldn't go out during COVID. I was traveling for work before that. And so I was spending a lot of time on the phone. The REC gave me a call list and everything. So I just started calling people, right? I have no opposition to that. Making a bunch of calls every single day.
For people who don't know, the REC is the Republican Executive Committee, which is the committee that leads the Republican Party in Palm Beach County. I was a member of that in the past.
Yeah. So you just make calls and you get to talk to people, right? And I'm not calling them saying, hey, I got 30 seconds, let me get through it real quick. I'm actually having conversations with people, right? Because that allows me to get a better understanding of what they are, and I think. The more I can add to my understanding of the community and of the vast difference of people in the district, the better I can be as a candidate and the better I could be as a politician to support them and to support the community. So it all starts with getting out there, talking to people any number of different ways, whether it's on social media, in person, by phone, and building those networks of people, right? And making them comfortable to say, look, yes, there's an R by my name, but between you and me and what's important to us, this is what's important. That's just something that has to be there, right? Whether it's a D or an R.
Let me just ask you this. So I've seen some Republicans who run on like I'm a Trump supporter and that's their campaign, and if in a Republican district that works great. I think your approach sounds like much more viable in our district than it would be somewhere else. But regardless of that, what my point about you can't talk to, even if you talk to 100 people a day, it wouldn't be enough, is what you typically have to do is you have to advertise on television or radio or some other way where you can reach a larger audience. And let me put it this way, because I pick on libertarians all the time about this. If you had to capture your message in 3 or 4 words, make America great again, I'm with her, keep hope alive, what's your 3 or 4 word phrase? And this is my point about this is, and mine, by the way, when I ran for office was stop wasting money. Okay, that was my big thing.
Yeah.
So if you had to pick a 3 or 4 word phrase that you thought would, and you don't have to have it yet. I found mine on the campaign. Talking to people led me to my phrase. But if you had to pick a 3 or 4 word phrase that you felt summarized your campaign, that you could connect to the other themes you're talking about, do you have one?
Yeah, I mean, there are some themes that I am playing with. Like what I find it, and again, this goes back to just having a conversation with people. Even you and I, we can find consensus on a lot of things. There are things that we might disagree on conceptually, but at the end of the day, we can find consensus. So saying, look, I'm like you, I'm with you. We can find that consensus. We can be rational people, and then also, like, for our children's future, because a lot of what I do and the way that I think about things is, because I do think very long term in a lot of my thinking is, what's gonna work so that we keep Florida, like Florida when my children grow up, when they're 18, when they're in college, or when they want to have a family of their own. How do we preserve the future of Florida for our children, right? So when I think about education, it's not only about the people that are in there now, but it's for, my children, my grandchildren. When it's healthcare, it's the same thing, right? Like I get, frustrated at a lot of the conversation around healthcare because it doesn't actually address the issue. It's all talking up here instead of in the actual, bones of it, where you need to make actual changes and bring back, I don't want to say a simpler, but a less government heavy management of it, to bring back that doctor-patient relationship, right? And doing things that are going to actually, help healthcare for our children in our future and our grandchildren, so that it's still there, right? Because I don't feel that if we continue the way we're going, healthcare is just going to keep going, skyrocketing, or we're going to move towards, more, one size fits all. And I don't think that that's the right way to do it. And I don't think that's going to be best for our kids' future. And that's where I think today we can start making changes, because anything we do today, I mean, this, even if the legislature passes it today, it takes time for it to really trickle into the society. And that's why we have to think, when we do things, we have to think, but not only, short term, midterm, long term, you have to have all those things in mind, because one of the greatest skills, I will say, that of humans is our ability to anticipate things and to adapt to them. And a lot of things can't be anticipated, but a lot of things can. And you can see, hey, if we do this, how is this going to affect certain areas? Okay, well, we know this is probably going to have a problem down the road. How do we mitigate that today, or what's our plan for when that happens? How do we make changes going forward? Right, so long story, I know I talked.
No, let me ask you something else that popped into my head. I should have asked you about this before with criminal justice related, I guess. You mentioned that your district includes Parkland. Parkland is the home of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, which is roughly 5 miles from both of our houses, as the crow flies, not driving, because we don't have our road through it. Gun control is a big issue. A lot of my neighbors think they don't really, to my opinion, have well-formed ideas about what gun regulations they would want to put. They just want to ban the scary guns, and they don't have any idea what that means. You're running as a Republican. Republicans generally support, with I think some major exceptions, the right to keep and bear arms. And what's your take on so-called assault weapons? What's your take on handguns? Actually, let's take a step back. Specifically with Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, let's focus on this particular thing. What would you do to reduce the risk? First of all, do you think, does this rank as a big concern? And if so, what would you do about making schools safer?
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely school safety is a very big concern, because I remember, where I was when that happened, because it was on Valentine's Day, and I was out kind of doing some Valentine's Day shopping. And then not too long ago, I don't know if you remember this because I was at a pool party, I think it was sometime last year. There was a little scare at the middle school, right? Do you remember hearing about that? And I was at a pool party with my kids, with their classmates, and you see the helicopters going over. So it's a very real concern for me as a parent. And, because I am pragmatic like I am, there are certain realizations that I've accepted, right? So I'm not going to, you're not going to change the Second Amendment, right? You have the Heller, Supreme Court decision, which, codifies a lot, right? So until there's certain changes at the top, I know as much as people want to say, well, we can do this, we can do that, there's a lot of things you can't do. I am definitely for common sense gun,
well, what does that mean? What's common sense gun reform?
So for example, it's making sure that guns aren't in the hands of people that are mentally ill.
How do you do that?
Right. Well, that's a good question. That takes a lot of people working together. So, and I say that because that's specific to, what happened in Parkland, right? You had a lot of instances where, there should have been reporting to say, hey, this person has a mental illness, right? This kid has issues, essentially, and I know people don't like the idea of having databases and things like that, but there needs to be a way for people of the psychology expertise or medical expertise to be able to say, look, hey, this person, if I think that they're enough of a danger to themselves and to others, and whether it's police, and there are red flag laws now, I need to be able to kind of, put my hand up somewhere and say, hey, this person deserves at least a more in-depth look.
Okay, but here's my problem with that.
And
here's my problem with that.
That requires proper
Here's
reporting.
my problem with that. Give Nancy Pelosi that power, and anyone who has any mental health diagnosis at all can't have a gun anymore.
Again, I don't think that should be done at the state level. I mean, sorry, at the national level.
Okay, but do it at the state level, and a Democrat gets control of the state. Sooner or later, the Democrats are going to win the state, at least for a little while, and they're going to decide. Look, the head of the Department of Agriculture's Nikki Fried. I actually voted for Nikki Fried. That's a long story, but maybe Nikki Fried becomes the next governor, and she says, "Well, okay, any mental health diagnosis at all, you can't have a gun."
But that's what the legislature's there for.
No,
right?
No, that's what the Second Amendment's there for, to say no, you can't do that, and that's what we need people like you to say no, we can't do that if you're going to say that.
Well, yes and no, right? The way, again, if you look at, the way the Heller decision was made and other Supreme Court decisions, the Second Amendment isn't universal, right? It doesn't give you the right to own a bazooka.
I'm not sure about that.
And shoot that thing.
I'm not sure I agree with you on that. Let me ask you this. Can I have my scary black rifle with 30-round super clips and a chainsaw bayonet?
Right now, yes, you can.
No, but if you have, have your common sense gun, that is fictional, by the way. The chainsaw bayonet, I'm
sure you can find someone on YouTube who's done it.
Your view of common sense gun reform? I don't believe in common sense gun reform. I believe that common sense is nonsense. That most of the people who talk about it don't know anything about guns. But does your notion of common sense gun reform say I can't start to control what kind of firearm I can have?
I think at a certain, again, I think at a certain level, yes, right. You don't want weapons of mass destruction in individuals' hands.
Well, what's a weapon of mass destruction?
Again, I'll use an RPG, right? Or a rocket propelled grenade. I would argue, any kind of projectile that can target more than one person at a time, right? I don't think that is as an idea. And I know shotguns, you can argue that, but they're less effective the further away they are. But
this is my point. That's exactly my point. When you let shotguns slip into that conversation, all of a sudden, well, wait a minute, now you're going to regulate shotguns. It's like
they already are.
I'm going to say to you bluntly, the only answer is government should. This is my opinion, and I'm not saying your voters share this view. Some do. But my answer is no, the government doesn't have any power to regulate this stuff. And yes, I should be able to own an RPG. If the government can have one, I can have one. That's the whole point of a militia. If you believe in the militia, then I should be able to have whatever the militia has.
How do I say this? I partially agree with you on that, right? I am a big fan of the idea of, the number one, I do support your right to own a gun. That's Second Amendment, right? That is very clear, and it's there for many reasons. And I don't think it should go away, right? I think it's there for many reasons. But at the same time, I do think that you do have an argument of that well-regulated militia, right? And what the purpose of the well-regulated militia is. And I know Heller didn't quite, they kind of pushed it off to the side, which I disagreed with. But I do think it's important, because I think the most important thing, because I grew up around guns. My father owned guns. I've shot, A4s and a lot of handguns and shotguns, been to the gun range many times, and other long rifles. But I think the most important thing that it taught me was, number one, that it's a tool, right? Just like a knife is, that in training and exposure are just as important as whether you want to have one or not. That's your choice, right? That's your right. You can decide. And again, it comes down to choice. Just because you have the right to do something doesn't mean you have to, right? Just because you have the right to own a gun doesn't mean you have to. And I think, everybody would be better off being exposed to certain things, at least going through the training, at least having shot one, of different things to know what it is. I'm not going to, say that, especially as a kid, when you get those little, M80s and you were, blowing things up, that was fun, right? You knew that. And sometimes, yes, there's an entertainment value to firing weapons at the range, right? There's a skills practice part of it. But there's also that little bit of something else that nobody ever talks about, that it's that exposure to that enlightens you on what it really is. I remember the first time I handled a gun, I was scared out of my mind. Because of all you knew about it was what you saw on TV, what you saw on the news.
I'm the same way.
And until you get that exposure,
I'm the same way.
It teaches you a different level of respect.
I'm the same way, and actually people think I'm a gun nut. I actually don't like shooting. The only gun I actually like shooting a little is my baby 22 rifle, Mossberg Plinkster, which is, tiny. Anything that's more serious than that, it's too loud, too much recoil. I train with them so that I will be accurate with them if I have to shoot them, but I don't like them. I find them uncomfortable. I find it loud. I don't even like the smells at a range, even though I like the camaraderie. I should say I like the camaraderie that you often get at the range. But personally, I'd rather hit golf balls. I'd rather shoot baskets with a basketball. I'd rather, whatever. So my friends think I'm a gun nut. I'm like, I'm not a gun nut. I don't actually like them. I just believe that it's important that we have them and that we're trained with them.
Yeah, and I think the key word, that you put is trained, because it's up to you whether you want to own one or not. You and your family, because I know people that are, very much, against guns, and this COVID crisis made them go out and buy a gun, right? Which was to me kind of a little bit funny. And I know people that are very pro Second Amendment, very gun, but they personally don't want to own one, right? And it's just their own choice, and I respect that, and I love that we have that choice, But I do think educating people and the public about what a gun is, how it works, what it feels like, the weight of it and the sounds, like the smells, because I think a lot of that alleviates fear in it, and I think that's best overall. We can have a longer debate about, rocket-propelled grenades and everything else like that.
Well,
one of the things I've always been surprised about.
We can agree I'm extreme on RPGs, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, who wouldn't want to own a tank and drive around
like
Arnold Schwarzenegger, right?
Tanks are legal. But I understand when I say I should be able to have an RPG. That's a relatively extreme view. Even my more conservative Republican friends, Warren's going off on the ledge there. Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
But listen, we've been going for a long time. You've been very cooperative. I really enjoyed the back and forth. I'm going to say we've done enough damage, but I want to give you a chance. If you have something else you want to say to people to round this out, what do you have to say to the voters of our district, that why they should vote for you, what matters coming forward? Tell me what you think.
I do appreciate your time, Warren. And the invitation. It has been a little bit of time, and like I said, I'm always open. I like these conversations, and I like being challenged because it makes me better, right? It forces me to think more about my own opinions and thoughts, and bring in new information. And what I want to tell the people of the district is I believe that, we deserve better. I didn't start off, saying, oh, I want to be a politician, right? I got involved because I was tired of not having representation, right? Not having, the ability to vote for my representative, my state senator. And I believe everybody deserves that. And at the end of the day, I'm coming from the approach as first and foremost as a father, right? I have 3 kids. A lot of what I do, or most of what I do, is based upon their wellness and their future. And I'm sure a lot of people in this district feel the same way about their own children and grandchildren. And if they want somebody who will actually talk to them, and I'm willing to have the same conversation with any one of our district, residents, even if it takes us 3 hours, right? Because I want them to be comfortable with me, because I want them to know me, because I want them to be able to call me when they have an issue. I want them to be able to say, hey, you pick up the phone and say, hey, Brian, this is the issue I'm having. I need your help. I may not be able to give a solution right away or give them something like that they want to hear, but I want to be there for them because they're part of my community. I want to know, what's going on, in their lives. I want to know, hey, what's the state doing well for you? What's it not doing well for you? Because all that information is going to make me better. It's going to make me a better individual, a better candidate, and if I win, a better legislator. The main things that I will say that I am focusing on, again, is education, it's healthcare, it's the environment, because all those things, I know they don't sound very Republican, but I think they in fact, they really are, because we need to fix these problems that we've been hearing for years. And I'm just tired of hearing people talking about, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. I'm very much about just getting it done. Putting something in there, let's try it, let's move on. If it doesn't work, we try something else, but we've got to be actively making progress, not just making speeches. And on top of that, I think good governance is important. I like having, people that are focused on doing what they're elected to do, and not to be a lifelong politician. I have no intention of being a lifelong politician. I'm here, I'm here to serve, because I think I can do a good job. I can be effective, and I can really provide some good change for our district and help propel Florida forward. Because Florida is a great state where it's at economically. It's a very growing state. We have a lot of good industry, but we need to address some of the issues that will cripple us down the road if we don't start tackling them today. I know it's not sexy to talk about what's going to happen in 10, 20 years, but it's vitally important if we care about our future and our children's future and our grandchildren's future.
Okay. Listen, thank you very much for coming on with me today. I am gonna I'm gonna go off the live stream, and then we'll talk for a minute, and then I'll let you go.
Sure. Yeah, anytime you want to do this again.
Thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you.